this event. Yes, today I will be speaking about interconnections between environment, society, and a little bit about technologies, because of which our audience is mostly in Zoom today. But yeah, I'm looking forward to present you the project which I'm currently working on, the title of which you can see on the slide. It's about environment, society, and the vertical climate frontier in the Greater Altai in the second half of the 20th and early 21st centuries. And yes, Katarina has already said, I'm a historian, environmental historian, so this is my background. I came to climate history from the field of environmental history of the Russian Empire. And today I won't be talking about so much about research outcomes, but rather about a project which was just launched in September 2024. It's funded by the Leibniz Foundation. It is for 5 years, and the head of our team is Julia Herzberg. I work in the project as a postdoc. We are looking forward to have a doctoral student from China who is joining us in August this year, hopefully, and she will be studying the Chinese part of the Altai region. And we have also two student assistant positions, and with this team we are going to go on field trip and do archival research in Kazakhstan, but in Mongolia. But the project has just started. We work on it for only 6 months, so I have to make an important caveat that now, today, I will be talking about the methodology and aims of this project. The outcomes will follow in the future. And now I can only use the data which we obtained in Russia 3 years ago, and about very recent research in Kazakhstan and Mongolia that I managed to get in the last 6 months. So this time my research will be very Soviet and post-Soviet centered, but we will fix it in the future. So, a small outline of my lecture today. I will start with the concept of frontier in general. What is frontier and what role does it play, this term play in environmental history. Then I will talk about mountain systems and the Greater Altai and the Anthropocene, about how climate change affects them and what makes them unique regions for environmental history. Then I will introduce the concept of the vertical climate frontier, which is central for the project and for my research, which advantages it offers in studying climate history of mountain regions. After that, I'll outline the key topics of our project, what we are concentrating on, what exactly we are investigating in the Greater Altai region, and finally I will be speaking about perceptions of climate change, how different social groups and scientists perceive climate change. And finally, I will make some, okay, I hope now you can hear me better. Yeah. Yes, and finally, I will wrap it up with the conclusions that we have so far, but then we will develop more on it in the future. Okay. Yeah. Let me start with a short story that just symbolically captures the essence of my today's talk. 100 years ago, in the 1920s, the Russian artist, writer, and mystic Nikolai Rerich went on expedition across Central Asian mountains. During his way through the highlands of the Altai, he met local Airot people who shared a legend with him. And according to this legend, people of Chut once lived in these mountains, but disappeared underground when the Russians arrived. Yet they sensed, according to the legend, they sensed the arrival of the Russian Empire, the arrival of the White Tsar, the monarch of the Russian Empire, even before they saw Russian invaders, because nature itself changed. A white birch tree grew in the mountains, and so soon after the White King or the White Tsar came. And the story is more than a legend. It reveals a deeper connection between political changes in the region, colonialism, and the environment of the Greater Altai region. The white birch was a sign of approaching colonization. And this is not just a folklore, because scientific data shows that even in the beginning of the 20th century, the forest line in the Altai has increased, shifted upwards dramatically long before the most visible effects of climate change in this region. Here you can see a couple of photos. The first one was made by Vasily Sapozhnikov, professor of the University of Tomsk in 1905. And the second photo was made almost in the same place 105 years after. And you can see on the photo that the riverbanks 1,000 years ago were barren, the valley was open, but today the same area is covered in forest. For local communities, this transformation was really profound. Forests are unfamiliar terrain for the Oirot people, and their traditional pastures shrank, making herding more difficult. Climate change overlapped with colonial expansion, reshaping both landscapes and livelihoods. So this intersection between environmental processes and colonization in history is actually the core of my research about the Altai mountains. But first I will develop more about the term frontier. What does it mean and how we treat them in history now, because I suppose that not everyone here is a historian dealing with frontier studies, so it's important to note that frontier is not the same what historians understood by frontier a century ago. One of the first historians who actively used this term was Frederick Turner, a historian Frederick Turner, who understood frontier as a line between a border between European civilization and wilderness. So there are Europeans on the one side and people who should be civilized on the other side. Of course, this term in its initial meaning is not useful today, but later on in the 20th century it was developed further. For example, historian Richard White redefined the frontier as a zone of mutual adaptation. It was not just about conflicts, it was also about interaction. Europeans and indigenous people didn't just fight, they exchanged technologies, they traded and influenced each other in complex ways. So John Richards, in his famous book, Unending Frontier, developed this idea further. He argued that frontiers were not just social and political phenomenon, they were also about environments. Colonization reshaped the environment. Animals, plants, bacteria and viruses introduced by settlers transformed ecosystems, and in some cases the natural world itself shaped how frontiers developed. However, Richard believed that frontiers were a thing of the past. He considered that only in relation to periods of colonization, active European colonization, and he suggested that it is not longer relevant today. But researcher Pekka Hämäläinen offers a wider understanding of frontiers from the perspectives of capitalist globalization. Capitalism continues to expand, technology spread, migration reshapes societies, and globalization always creates new frontiers, making the concept as relevant as ever, especially when viewed through environmental lens. So on the right you see the famous photo. This is a mountain of bison skulls, and this photo was made in the 19th century in North America. It's often believed that European settlers in North America deliberately exterminated bison to subjugate the indigenous peoples of America who depended on those animals. But as Andrew Eisenberg points out in his book, which you can see on the slide, you cannot see it here on the slide, yes, yeah. So he points out that reality was far more complex. This was not just a coordinated effort to wipe out the whole species. It was the effect of capitalist market forces in the North American frontier. At some point, bison leather became highly valuable because, unlike cowhide, they were less porous and better suited for making belts and shoes. So it was not only about colonization, it was also about capitalism. And the result, bison hunting intensified dramatically, and it wasn't just Europeans, indigenous peoples who had traditionally hunted bison, also took part in this process because now they used guns and horses introduced by settlers. So, of course, there are no bison in the Altai, but this example shows how ecology and culture are intertwined on the frontier. Human interaction with nature in these zones is a complex, multi-sided process where different groups reshape and influence each other, exchanging technologies and transforming environment along the way. Yeah, so why are the mountains so important? First, they are among the most remote and inaccessible areas on the Earth. As you can see from the slide, many of them are located along the continent's edges or state borders. Yet they play a crucial role in global ecosystems and cultures, covering about 1/5 part, almost 20% of the planet's land surface. And secondly, the verticalization in the mountains create exceptional environmental and cultural diversity. A mountainous area can contain far more species and cultural traditions than a similar-sized region on flatland. This makes them incredibly rich, but also very vulnerable before climate change. Actually, altitudinal and latitudinal zonations are function in similar ways, and any climate change, whether a rise in average temperatures or shifts in precipitation, has a much stronger and more immediate impact in high altitude regions than in lowland areas. So mountain ecosystems feel these changes far more acutely than most. And there are actually a lot of studies about different mountain ranges. Today, there are a lot of books about mountains in Europe and in North and South America. However, Central Asia, and especially the Altai, remains relatively underexplored from the field of environmental humanities and mountain studies. The Greater Altai is a mountain system located in at the intersection of 4 countries, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, and China. And yet ecologically and culturally, it's a single region, historically inhabited by Turkic people, and it is home for many ecosystems and species who live there. It was only in the 18th century that the Altai became a contested space between 2 empires, Russia and China. This region is particularly interesting for studying climate change and mountain community transformations because throughout the 20th century it was under influence of 2 major state socialist powers, Russia and China. Many scholars, and yeah, I will tell more on that soon paid attention to how capitalist market economics worked in similar region, but in our project we ask how a planned economy and state socialism influenced climate change adaptation, which was already profound in this region in the Soviet period, and it's still relevant to the People's Republic of China. So, climate change can create new frontiers, facilitating the spread of capitalism and colonialism in new territories. Several researchers have already written about this, each approaching the topic differently though. You can see here 3 examples. So those scholars wrote about the connections between economics, especially capitalism, and natural disasters. So the topic is very close, but they approached it in different ways. For example, Naomi Klein in her works coined the term disaster capitalism, pointing that natural disaster foster development of market relations and influence of corporations on the regions that suffered from natural disasters. Jack Walter mostly focused on earthshakes, and he coined the term shaky colonialism, how earthshakes make the people living in the zones of disasters more dependent on the state or corporations who rebuild their livelihoods. And Mark Carey, he studied particularly mountain regions, and he wrote about economics of disasters, how climate change and natural disasters creates new kinds of economic relations between indigenous people, state power, corporations, and other actors of market economy. But as I already said, we are going to pay attention to how natural disasters and climate change influenced state power in the Altai. Of course, the situation in this mountain range was slightly different, and planned economy worked differently from market. As you can see on the photo on the slide, there's Karl Marx with the house destroyed by melting permafrost on the background. I will mention this village later on, and will tell more about that. But it symbolizes how natural disasters promote not only capitalist economies, but also state power in the mountain regions. Because state created new spaces for people, they were more dependent on the state power, and that's how climate change influenced relations between state power and indigenous local communities. So, in the first part of my talk, I focused on 2 key points. First, the concept of the frontier remains relevant today. It describes not only historical past, but also many of the processes happening around us today. In a broad sense, a frontier is not just a boundary which moves back and forth, it's a space of interaction between cultures and the environment when new economic relations emerge, new forms of governance take shape, and power relations shift. And second, natural disasters and environmental crises create new frontiers and maintain them. Areas once seen as peripheral or remote suddenly attract attention of society and state power. Disasters demand state or corporate intervention, pulling local communities into market economies or closer ties with governmental structures. Climate change works in a similar way. It's largely driven by lowland societies, whether capitalist or socialist, but its effects are felt most intensely in the mountains. Through this process, new forms of interaction reach high altitude region. So basically, what's the vertical climate frontier? We define it as follows. The climate change induced advance of new forms of economic interaction and intensification of state regulation in previously isolated and remote high mountain regions. involving the transformation of the environment and the traditional way of life of the local population. So, to understand how the vertical climate frontier operates in the Greater Altai, I will focus on key points of interaction between lowland societies, the policies of the Greater Land, and high-altitude communities. Simply put, how climate change either provokes conflicts or fosters interaction between them. And this mind map highlights the key points where those interactions are more intense. First, there is tension between planned or market economy and nomadic pastoralism. Since the first colonial intrusions, the Altai has been a meeting point for these systems, and climate change, especially shifts in precipitation rates and landscape zones, has made pastoralism much more vulnerable. Already in the Soviet period, those changes put increasing pressure on herders. Secondly, climate change also affects wildlife conservation. All four Altai states, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, and China, have established protected areas to maintain animal populations. But these reserves are often created on traditional grazing lands, causing conflicts between local communities and the state power in the Altai. Third, this is the spread of plague, what I meant by disease control. The primary carriers are marmots and other rodents which have long been hunted by local populations. Governments intervene in this process by restricting or banning hunting, directly impacting traditional practices of the local population. And another key factor, it's already mentioned natural disasters. When states or corporations step in to manage crisis, they inevitably disrupt local ways of life. And finally, there is a tension between Western science and traditional environmental knowledge. Scientific research claims objective authority, and state policies often align with expert recommendations, but those recommendations don't always match local worldviews and practices. So in the next sections of my talk, I will take a closer look at some of those issues. The first of them is the precipitation. Here you can see on the pictures that, and especially from the graph below, that over the past decades, the region has experienced dry, rainy, and snowy periods, but overall precipitation is steadily rising, especially in the southern and central Altai region. This change influences many aspects of life, including architecture. You can see a so-called roofless house in the Altai highlands. And initially, the housing of the locals were designed for extremely arid climate. Summer rains were rare and winters brought very little snow, so little that steep European-style roofs were not needed. Instead, houses had flat roofs which helped just retain heat but didn't protect from precipitation. But the impact goes beyond construction. The biggest shift is vegetation. Former grazing lands are turning into forests and wetlands, making them unsuitable for livestock. Heavy snowfalls in winter led to droughts, situation where livestock graze because of ice or snow. So they lost access to pastures and they cannot graze openly. This is particularly devastating in Mongolia, where mass deaths of livestock push herders to the brink of survival. These extreme winters have become increasingly frequent in recent years. And climate change, of course, affects not only cattle, but also wild animals, as domestic herds are forced to compete with them for pasture. This problem was especially pronounced during the Soviet era, when the planned economy prioritized production targets, not the needs of the local herders, but the demands of the wider region for meat and dairy. So how basically it worked in the plant economy, you can see a quotation from newspaper issued in the 1985. So the title is "Why is the Shepherd Unhappy?" And this wording is very interesting. It mentions that elders of Kurchum, this is a village in the Altai Highlands, cannot remember a winter like this one. The heavy precipitation came as a surprise. Snow piled up in places where it had never fallen before. The roads to the haystacks became impassable. But who was guilty in that? Who was responsible for implementing the plans? Careless farmers, director of farms, were left without fodder right at the start of the winter. So despite the climate factors and despite the weather, they had to implement the plan. They had to give certain products to the state economy. And for example, the second quote comes from Erik Gukasov, chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. And this was already during perestroika, but the mindset remained unchanged. Production targets must be met, and climate is no excuse. In his view, if the plan is not fulfilled, there is only one explanation: bad leadership. This was a clear message to local officials, including those in eastern Kazakhstan and the Altai region, that despite all the climate-induced disasters, the plan must be reached. And at the end of this chain, of course, the high-altitude herders of the Altai, they were obliged to meet the state demands, even when the weather made it absolutely impossible. Yeah, so wild animals in the Altai, and particularly large mammals, were under double pressure. On the one hand, climate change is reducing their food sources. In winter, as well as cattle, they cannot simply find enough to eat. On the other hand, they must compete with livestock for pasture, and during heavy snowfall, weakened animals become easy targets for hunters. Deep snow leaves them absolutely defenseless. On this slide, you can see two eyewitness accounts, and interestingly, the first of them is from 1987 and the other from 2021. Yet they describe nearly identical events. The first is from southern Kazakhstan, where from southern part of the Kazakhstan Altai, where climate change was already obvious and profound in the 1980s. On the northern slopes of the Altai, those effects took much longer to manifest. So both accounts tell the same story. Starving wild animals approached settlements, seemingly looking for food, and locals interpreted this as a plea for help. But instead of offering help, they shot them. This was especially brutal when entire herds or mothers with offspring wandered into villages. In some cases, hunters just killed them all. The same thing is happening today in the Koshagach district of the Russian Altai. Among locals, opinions on this practice are divided. But it's important to understand the context that many people in the region live in deep poverty with little or no income. And actually the Altai is the region with the highest unemployment rate in Russia. So more than 50% of population in the Altai Republic has no job and no money income. So stockpiling meat, and especially in winter, is not just practical but often necessary. But of course, it's only worsens environmental impact of climate change. State policy towards the high altitude communities of the Greater Altai has always been contradictory, and this is very important to understand that state was not just one actor in this region. There were several institutions, several ministries in the USSR or in China, and then in Russia and Kazakhstan, who demanded plans or implementation of certain federal programs and so on. And so the situation was that one ministry demanded meat, milk, and other products of herding. The other ministry controlled hunting, and they also had plans which should be implemented. And the third force demanded nature preservation at the same time. So it's three sources of pressure on the local communities. As you can see from the table on the left, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, all Altai region states expanded protected areas in the mountains. The goal was to preserve ecosystems, particularly the population of Argali mountain sheep that, of course, have no regard of national borders, and they tend to migrate from, one part of the Altai to another part. And unsurprisingly, conservation efforts were met with resistance among the local population. So here is a quotation from my conversation with Leonard Takhanov, who is deputy director of the Sailugem National Park in the Russian part of the Altai. And he admitted that the park's creation in 2010 triggered a major dispute among the locals. In the end, it was established with a reduced format, but still there are tensions between local population and state power, who demanded control over nature in the Altai. But the conflict didn't end after the creation of the national park. Traditional hunters, continuing their way of life, are now labeled as poachers and fined for hunting in protected areas. Yet, as I've mentioned before, for many, hunting is not a luxury, it's just means of survival. And meanwhile, wealthy visitors or influential visitors from major cities enjoy far more freedom, as you can see, for example, from this news. There was a case when the governor of the Irkutsk region died in a helicopter crash. The state tried to hide the real reason for that, but apparently he was hunting through helicopter on the local animals, so he was not prosecuted for poaching, but of course local population is the most vulnerable group of society, suffers most from those restrictions. And unlike changes in precipitation, permafrost thawing leads to much more dramatic and destructive consequences. And this is not just a slow environmental shift, it's a kind of disaster that can wipe out entire villages, leaving people homeless and forcing them to relocate. Here are two drawn images. The first shows the ruins of the Akhtal village, the one where I took the photo of Karl Marx, when they were resettled at the new place, and built new houses. It was destroyed in 1985 by rapidly melted permafrost. And the second shows the aftermath of a cryogenic landslide near Stary Beltir. The village itself was wiped out in 2003 by an earthquake. While the quake itself was not caused by climate change, permafrost thawing made its effect far worse. You can see in the photo how an entire section of the mountain collapsed because it had once been held together by permafrost that no longer exists. So villagers had to relocate to the new place, but the quotation from the interview with the resident of Stary Beltir village shows that this help was not that helpful. In some situations, they were just forced to relocate far from their lands, which they used for herding, and it made them more dependent on the state. Okay, I will move forward a bit quicker. And one of kind of unexpected consequences of climate change in the Altai has been the spread of bubonic plague. Historically, the Altai has already been a transit zone for bubonic plague between Europe and China because of the Silk Road. And that's how this disease spread to different regions. And today, new outbreaks are emerging in this region again. Due to climate change, the plague is moving north from the southern slopes of the Altai in Mongolia and China into Russia and Kazakhstan. Just as in 14th century Europe, rodents remain the primary carriers of the plague. You can see a poster on the right showing such a demonic giant marmot with an inscription that be careful, you are in a natural plague hotspot, avoid contact with rodents, get vaccinated, and other advices how to behave in this territory. And on the left there is a photo of a man who works in Russian Rospotrebnadzor, and basically he is implementing control over the population of marmots. So basically they just kill them to stop the spreading of bubonic plague. But hunting marmots is one of the most popular kind of hunting among the local populations, and they are not going to give it up. They just invent new ways how to cook marmots so that it was tasty and safe. Still, sometimes people get bubonic plague, but yeah, they have their own strategy to adjust to it. Yeah, melting glaciers pose yet another serious challenge for the Altai mountains. You can see from the series of photos how the Aktru glacier reduced its size from the 1918 to 2021. And the photo shows that the most dramatic changes actually occurred in the 21st century. And the locals really feel the melting of glaciers because of water resource depletion. Glaciers fed rivers, but not only big rivers such as the Katuny or the Irtysh. They also fed small streams which give water to the cattle of the local population, and now many of them are disappeared, even because of increasing precipitation here, because it was made by glacier water. And it leads to ecosystem degradation because glacier retreat alters hydrological patterns affecting vegetation and biodiversity. And as I already mentioned, it's also about increased epidemic diseases. So I'm going to slowly wrap up main topics of my talk. As we have already seen in previous slides, climate change in the high altitude regions of the Greater Altai affects multiple areas: physical, ecological, social, and economic spheres of life. But all of these consequences follow one common trend. Maintaining a traditional way of life is becoming increasingly difficult. People either leave the mountains altogether to become absorbed into new economic systems, or they either plan to a capitalist. And this shift happens through different mechanisms. First, some residents simply leave the highlands, so it's about vertical migration, and many states support it. They can provide flats with big discount for people who lived in the highlands. And other people try to adjust to changed economies by trading with tourists. There is an interesting quotation from the conversation which my colleagues had with this herding family. They complain that they have no one to sell the products of herding. There is no demand for it. And the main change they noticed is not that people bought it before, but the state, which demanded implementing plans, at the same time provided a certain source of income for them. They didn't have to learn how to trade. They were sure that they will always able to give it to the state and earn at least something for life. So tourists bring money, and tourists bring capitalism, forcing the locals to find new sources of income and abandon their traditional lifestyles. There are actually many ways to interpret the changes happening in the high altitude regions of the Altai due to climate change. However, in the Altai and as in other mountain regions, it's widely believed that Western-centric natural science holds a monopoly on truth. In other words, only scientists affiliated with universities and research institutions can produce real knowledge. Western science often acts as a colonizing force, designing adaptation strategies in the interest of state power and large corporations who can give funding for this kind of research. Of course, scientific research about climate and environment is definitely important, but it can be improved by adding more about local perspectives, more on social, political, and cultural context, and developing communication with the locals who often approached in paternalistic attitude that scientists will explain how to live, how to behave, how to adjust to climate change. So what I'm going to pay attention is traditional environmental knowledge, or as Fikret Berkes put it in his book, it's a sacred ecology, which is important because it connects climate change with inequality and with colonial processes. So how the locals perceive climate change? Yeah, this is one of the last slides of my talk. You can see here our respondent from the Altai, who thinks that climate change is influenced by colonial intrusions into the Altai, and especially about the unearthing the mummy of a noble woman, which happened in the 1993, shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he thinks that because of that, earthquakes started happening more often, and also floods. There was no water there before, he said, and then it started pouring for 2 months straight, non-stop rain. So these colonial intrusions creates such a mystic connection between colonialism and climate change. And one of the respondents who directly put it was Vasily, a villager of Stary Beltirs, this destroyed village, which he refused to leave. It was difficult to get in touch with him because he is a shaman, but there are 2 kinds of shaman, touristic shamans and shamans who serve the local population. So we didn't tell him that we know his kind of work he does for the local community, but in the middle of the talk he started to speak about climate change as a shaman with his spiritual experience. So the nature is an external force that punishes people for their greed, for their desire of more. And the reason of climate change is the revenge from the princess of Foucault. Now she will come back with the water, he said, our God will come back with the water. And this connects the White Tsar, which I mentioned in the beginning, with Foucault princess. They are such a mystic figures that contradict each other and build connection between the environment and climate change. So, yeah, shortly, just 3 conclusions. First of all, I think that the concept of the vertical climate frontier is a good way to systematize those rich number of consequences of climate change, which lay in different spheres of human life. The frontier, the concept of frontier, allows us to view local communities as not just silent objects of colonization, but also as active participants in adaptive processes. And the Greater Altai has long been considered as a model region for scientific research to investigate how would climate change work also in other, for example, northern regions. But it's also important, it also works with humanitarian research, because we can see how people interact because of profound climate change in a small territory. Yeah, so I'm afraid I'm a bit out of the schedule, so I will stop here and you can just read this slide about our next steps. But from now on, I'm open for your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just move up here again for the discussion. Okay, thank you so much for this very broad overview of what looks to be a very extensive project. And I'm sure there will be lots of questions and comments also online, so if somebody could monitor. And I already see, but sorry, I'm sitting here, so I'll go first, and then it's your turn, Stefan, and then we move online also. So thank you so much, Andrei. As you know, I'm not at all, I'm neither historian nor familiar with this region. So my questions come from a place of total ignorance. Please forgive me. But perhaps just to understand a little bit better, I wasn't quite sure, and I'm just for clarification, what timeline you're applying here, or what chronology you're applying. And I mean, you also, in the title, you also use the word Anthropocene, and of course there's a debate, when does the Anthropocene start? You know, how can we periodize it? But I'm not referring to that really. I'm just wondering if I understood correctly that you pose like a traditional period, which was then kind of replaced or probably more overlaid by a period of increased state power. And climate change happens somewhere in between, just to understand the temporal layers that you're posing for this. If I understood correctly, that there's a before and after somehow. And when do you see this traditional time? When does it end, or when does it start? Or do you really rather operate with a model of overlapping and overlaying processes that happen simultaneously? Because that would make more sense to me, and it also sounded a bit like it, but it doesn't. I wasn't quite sure listening to the talk. So that's one question. The other is the methodology, because as we know, research on climate change has a bit of a problem in that we cannot see climate change as such happening. And there's of course also then, of course, doubts. Is this really climate change? Is it just a weather phenomenon, etc.? But my question for your project is, how do you see the climate change? How do you manifest it? Is it through interviews and narratives? Because you have shown us narrative sources now, both from press, like earlier press, but also oral interviews. Do you also use other data, other sources? Are there any other data and sources? Or do you map climate change through oral sources? Because that's also sometimes what happens and what we have to do, because lacking other data. So that would be one other question. That also refers to your team and your keep, really. What kind of sources can you access and what can you process? How many different disciplines can you accommodate in this project? Another question, how do you, if I understood correctly, your hypothesis is that in times of climate change and other catastrophes, the state gains strength because people are more dependent on state help. But what you showed us sounded like there's less state. And people actually complain about the state not being there enough and not being strong enough. And you showed us both a turn towards privatization, and also a complete abandonment, kind of, that people feel. There's no schooling, there's no infrastructure, etc. So how do you see this increased role of the state or the strengthening of the state? How do you measure it, and how do you see it? Why is this happening? Because I didn't really see it so much. Finally, I have questions about the dichotomy between Western science and traditional knowledge. It goes back a little bit to my first question about when does it overlap, does it interact, or is this two different complete binary systems? But I'll leave those for later, perhaps, in order to give you a chance to respond, and then also give Stefan and others a chance to ask more questions. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those questions are really important. Yeah. So, about chronology, yeah. The chronological frames of the project, it's from the 1950s to the 2020s, and here we indeed try to follow the social chronology and chronology of climate change. Mid-20th century is a very important period also for environmental history, because as John McNeill, for example, put it, it was a period of the great acceleration, a turning point of the Anthropocene, and it also manifested in the Altai, because one of the first outbreaks of bubonic plague in the central and northern part of the Altai was in the 1953. And it was one of the most visible consequences of climate change in this territory. And then in the second half of the 20th century, the effects of the climate change became more and more visible. In the 2020s, many things has changed in the Altai region. It was a period when, for example, the sphere of tourism changed dramatically because of the COVID pandemics. And then the region was reconsidered as a transit space between Russia and China, because they are going to build this, how to translate it, the Power of Siberia line to sell Russian gas to China, and yeah, it reshapes the economy of the region and the role of the region and its international importance. So we are going to stop with 2020. Yeah, so those are two main events which shapes the climatic history of the Altai. So that's why we follow this chronology, which is both social and also environmental. So that's why I think it fits into the field of climate history or environmental history.
Yes,
yeah?
but I mean, my question would also be, is the traditional period then lasting through all this time, or is it ending at some point? How does that relate? Because you said it's traditional versus modern, I guess, although you didn't use the term. I'm just interested in this, how you conceptualize these binaries somehow. You
mean traditional perception, of... Or...
Well, you spoke of traditional, I think, economy, traditional knowledge, traditional belief systems, etc. So, is this going on all the time between 1950 and 2020? Do you also see changes there? Is there a cut? That was my question. How do you, or do you really see more of an overlap between different forms?
So basically, how this dichotomy of traditional and colonial worked throughout this period. Okay, thank you. I will. I will take it as a homework. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize.
No problem. Okay. The second question was about methodology, how we can approach climate change. Indeed, it's a very important part of our research, because for the local people, sometimes there is no climate. If you ask them if climate has changed recently, they would answer no, nothing like this, we don't notice it. But when I asked them about precipitation, about snow, about rain, of course they see a lot of changes that shapes their lives. So it's very important to keep in mind that climate is the term that we use in our life, and this is just a concept which is not relevant to traditional worldview. So I always try to avoid asking about climate. I ask about changes in nature, about rains, about snow, but still we cannot get rid of this term in our research because that's how research works. To be understood, we have to speak about climate in the end. About the state control, I see the point, how we can measure it, especially after disasters, but the thing here is that state help and state control is not the same. So people say that they got no help from the state because what state offered them, just move somewhere to the middle of the step, was perceived by the state as help, but it was not help for the locals. It was another disaster because they lost access to their traditional way of life and the places that they were attached to. But I think that it really increased the state control because the life was simplified, people were moved to typical housing, and they established a collective farm nearby where they were supposed to work. So I'm speaking about state control. So I think the control increased, but it was not help. So that's why people perceive it like that. And the last question, could you please remind me?
The last would be about Western science, etc. But I think we should leave that and give Stefan a chance to ask his questions.
Okay.
Also.
All right. Thank you very much. One second. It's an absolutely fascinating piece of research. I have a couple of really basic questions, I guess. First of all, I'd like to hear more about the individual cases that you're going to look at, and that also then refers to the structure of the project as a whole. You mentioned Julia Herzberg's research. You mentioned that you're going to have a doctoral student as well. You're going to be you are the postdoctoral researcher. So who's doing what, in other words, and how do these cases relate to each other? And that raises this sort of related question of where exactly is the comparison? You're comparing, as far as I understood, 4 countries, Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China, during this particular period, but will the comparison happen within individual projects? Or is the comparison happening basically in edited volumes or things that you're going to do together as a group? That as a sort of structural question. And then maybe in a sort of related to that, when you look at these individual cases, I mean, what are your expectations? What are your hypotheses? Where do you expect major differences to appear, geographically speaking? That's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, the role of state socialism. I find that super intriguing, but I'm still trying to sort of wrap my head around it. How would state socialism sort of counter climate change differently from other economic systems? Why would it do that, and how would it do? What are your sort of expectations and hypotheses there? I mean, one thing that springs to mind is obviously plans and regulations, but we live in Germany, and there are so many regulations here, despite the fact that it's not state socialism. So in that, there has to be more to it. And then maybe the final question is about colonization and colonialism. You use these terms, and I'm really sort of intrigued by it. Do you use them more as sort of for the historical part, or would you say that this is totally ongoing, that even in 2020 we can speak of colonization, colonialism in this region? And then what exactly do you mean by that term? Where do you see the manifestations of colonialism? And I'm asking this specifically because just last week I was in Austria, in Innsbruck, and when you go into the villages around it, and there's mountains everywhere, obviously they have, I talked to some people about, you know, how the regional administration in Innsbruck floods them with regulations and things like that as well, but no one would ever speak of colonization or colonialism coming out of Innsbruck. Despite the fact that it's like mountain people versus sort of lowland regulations. So where exactly does this have more to do with cultural difference? And if yes, what are the elements of this cultural difference? Sorry, too many questions, but it's...
Yeah, yeah, that's great, thank you. Yeah, we'll start with our individual cases in the project. So Julia Herzberg is going to write 2 articles about the Altai, and the first one will be about a resort in the mountains, which is now territory of Kazakhstan. It's a very interesting case study of, first it was a Buddhist place for religious practices with hot streams from the underground. Then a Russian peasant established a resort for the locals to earn some money, some income. That's how it existed, I think, until the middle of the 20th century, when the USSR decided to establish an official public resort in this area, and then it was privatized in the 1990s. Because again, capitalist economy came to this region and started to reshape the economy, the landscape, and so on. So that will be her case for one of the paper. Our doctoral student, Suli, would concentrate on Xinjiang region of the People's Republic of China, and expect that it will be difficult to do this research because it's a super complicated region, you know, because of inter-ethnic conflicts and suppression of the Uyghur people by the state power. But hopefully she will make it because she can speak Chinese, she has a Chinese passport, so maybe yeah, it will be possible for her to do this. And speaking about my book, I have to write a book as a result of the project, and my idea is what I presented today. I'm going to concentrate on clashes between climate change, society of the highlands, and the state power or capitalism after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I would focus on topics, for example, changing precipitation plus nomadic pastoralism, melting glaciers plus landscape change, and property on land. So we'll see, I'm still in the beginning, but I'm going to structure my research like this. Yeah, so the second question was about our expectations, also about the difference of state socialism, right? Yeah, so far I can't say that I have any strong expectations, so it will be okay if in the end of my research I will say, okay, state socialism worked absolutely similarly as capitalism, but I don't think that it will be like this, because yeah, state power demanded implementing the plans. At the same time, it provided some help for the local people. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to defend the planned economy, but some people in Kazakhstan, for example, they recall the times of the USSR with pleasure, because they were sure that they will get at least some income. But now in a capitalist economy, no one guarantees it, and they can move away somewhere to the city, and then the state support them, they will give them a flat and so on. So yeah, this is just, I'm just thinking aloud, so there are some differences between policies, and I'm not going to defend state socialism or capitalism. I'm not going to prove that something is better, something is worse. I'm just concentrating on differences. Yeah, and the third question is super important about colonialism. I think that yes, it's something still ongoing. Of course, it's about cultural differences, but that's how frontiers work, right? Cultures should be different to allow us to approach it as a frontier. So climate change pushes the state to create instructions for the locals. Like, for example, to avoid bubonic plague, you should go there, you shouldn't go there, you should hunt those animals, you shouldn't hunt these animals. While the locals invent their own strategies, how to cook marmots, how to hunt marmots, how to avoid the bubonic plague. State sees the decision for natural disasters as replacement, for example, somewhere to a new place, and it looks absolutely good for them, but the locals had another opinion. So I think, yes, it's colonialism. Now it's caused by spatial extension of capitalism, which works like that. It should involve more and more people. So I would perceive it as colonialism, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Frederic, is this a question or? Yes. Oh, go on. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Just a question out of curiosity, because I'm coming from West Africa, I have no knowledge of the region. I'm really curious about the territorial frontier, because you mentioned the mountains are situated there, the four countries. So I was wondering to what extent they are, that region is connected, the local population, do they have like historical exchange between each other? I mean, the country boundaries, are kind of real, I mean, separated by mountains, so these peoples don't really interact with each other, or on the contrary, do they have exchanges? Because coming from West Africa, I mean, a lot of frontiers or country borders, I mean, local population interact a lot and go to one country to another. So I was wondering, in that region, is it really connected? How the state is imposing artificial boundaries, maybe, or not? So just out of curiosity, you wanted to, because there's this vertical frontier, but is there also a real frontier, I mean, between people of these four countries? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, it's a... Okay. This is a sailing speaking. All right. So, yeah, there are transboundary connections between the locals, because before Russia and China invaded this region, there was a state of Jungaria centered around the Altai, actually. And there are people who inhabited this state, also the Uyghurs, who lived across the borders. There are a lot of them in Kazakhstan, a lot of them in China, and this is a long and tragic story, how their connections were broken, and how many of them tried to flee to Kazakhstan because it was better to live there, because it's a Turkic state. Yeah, and also after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there are very strong connections between Kazakh people living in what is now Russia and living in Kazakhstan and in Mongolia. So when I came to the region, I met a lot of people with relatives in Mongolia, in Russia, but Kazakhstan, of course, is far more closed country, so connections are not so strong. And this is not only about the locals, it's also about nature preservation, because national parks and scientists working in national parks communicate quite often between all the four countries. So yeah, this region is separated, but at the same time there is something that keeps connections between the locals and residents of the region. Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question. Yeah. So shall we?
One question online. Yes.
Okay, Tatiana.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, and the project sounds really, really promising. So I'm looking forward to result of your research and publications that will follow. I have two quick questions because you used this concept of the vertical frontier and talking about the shift in the geographical zones. So can you talk a little bit more about this shift? I mean, are you working with kind of a hypothesis about this shift of the geozones vertically, or do you have any data or this data visualization on this shift, or you going to prove this after your research? So how do you use this idea of the shift of the geographic zones in a vertical frontier? I love the idea of the three-dimensional research here, and not just, talking about changes on kind of flat, because we're talking about the highlands. And the second question, maybe you can, is it a part of your research looking at the infrastructure changes, how these melting mountains and the climate change that you're looking at, can you see any impact or the transformation in the frontier zone on the infrastructure there? And I mean like roads, bridges, or any other means of infrastructure, because of course, anthropologically, we can understand this even broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana, for the questions. About vertical shift, it arises from the concept of vertical periphery, that regions can be peripherized not only horizontally but also vertically. And vertical dimension makes regions located in mountain ranges, even it's in the middle of European Union, for example, like as the Alps, more peripherized and less accessible. Yeah, so this term of vertical periphery allows us to speak about also vertical frontier, that is not just a horizontal border, and the Altai was long part of different states, 3 or 4 states historically, but still the frontier at some point started to move not in horizontal direction but also upwards. Yeah, so it's a geographical shifts because of geographical zones, and this is also cultural shifts because people who lived in a remote region, in peripherized region, occasionally became like an object of state attention because of changing climate, because of disasters, because of plans which should be implemented. Yeah, so I think this vertical dimension is important from this perspective. And infrastructure, of course, it is important, and it suffers a lot from permafrost thawing because roads disappear, and the dredging landslide, which I showed on one of my slides, also destroyed connections between the village of Stary Beltir and pastures which belonged to the locals. And borders between different states also pay attention also important, I mean, in terms of infrastructure, because they are moving. There were less borders throughout the 20th century, and then now we have more of them. So yeah, infrastructure is a huge topic. It's also about energy. It's also about water in this region because of melting glaciers. So I'm not sure if I will go deeper into these problematics because it's very huge and slightly different topic. But yes, of course, there are a lot of questions about it. Thanks.
Thank you. I think there's one more question online by Dilara.
Dilara, yes, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much for this lecture. I enjoyed it very much. Yes, thank you. And how much of my questions have you heard so of my talk?
Nothing.
Nothing? Okay. Okay. Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, it was the internet connection failure. I just want to say that I'm a historian working on the Muslim Tatars of the Volga-Urals region, but partially I'm also interested in the Altai Mountains as the Turkic-speaking communities. And I have nothing to say, or to just I don't know anything about vertical climate frontier, but I have two questions. The first one is related to the collection of the medical plants. And as far as I remember, since the late 1990s, the Altai Mountains became like a center for collection and sale of the medical plants. And the question is, so can we also consider this as a part of vertical climate frontier, or how does this climate change affect the availability of these plants and the environment of the local population in this harvesting? And the second question is related to the Kosharash district that you mentioned. Muslim Kazakh people, they are the minority. They form the minority within the Altai Republic, and how the question is how does climate change impact traditional forms both for Muslim Kazakhs and Altai people? So, for example, in hunting or different forms of traditional life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilara. Speaking about plants, I cannot really say anything about this. I just have no data about how climate change influenced this, but thank you for the hint. Yeah, it's also, I suppose it's a way of commercializing the mountains to collect plants and sell them. So this is also part of this frontier space, I suppose. So I will take a look at it in my research. And how climate change influences traditional cultures of the locals. Yeah, I mentioned several things about it. So first of all, it just makes them those societies less numerous, because a lot of people just move from the highlands to Gorno-Altaisk, for example, and because it's easy to get a flat in Gorno-Altaisk. This is also because of the climate change, not only about this, but also about this. It's because of hunting, because the number of wild animals decreases. It's about national parks, because they try to preserve animals, but at the same time they put restrictions on the locals. Yeah, so it's basically about the whole project, yeah, which we try to investigate. In the project, it's all about how climate change influences traditional societies, and this influence is very, very important. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One more question in the chat.
Okay, yeah, I will read it aloud. Yeah, a question from Thomas. I am a cultural historical geographer in Freiburg. What was the environment like during the last two warm periods around the 1st century AD and the 1st century?
The first, like,
yeah.
1000 AD.
Yeah, 1000, yeah. When it was about +2 degrees. Well, I don't know. Yeah, so, sorry, it's, yeah, of course I collected data about climate history of the Altai throughout the part of the 19th and 20th century, and I know that there are fluctuations in climate. So, for example, in the historical past, reindeers used to live in this region, and then climate change influenced the life of the local people also in this way. Yeah, but it's out of the scope of the current project, sorry.
Are there any historical sources about the 1st century AD, for instance, for this region? I really don't know.
Historical sources, yeah, I don't know. I can only recommend some sources, some research about this. For example, Piers Vitebsky, who wrote about reindeers, how they lived in this region in the past. This I can say. Okay.
Okay, so my question, I mean, I have some questions related to this dichotomy between Western science and traditional knowledge, and you gave us a few examples now in your talk and also in the Q&A where this contrast plays out. And one of the examples was that you said, well, you are interested in climate change, but people only have information or speak about precipitation or other phenomena and not climate change. So that's one dichotomy, I suppose. Perhaps not between traditional knowledge, but local knowledge and Western science. So would you posit or would you see yourself on the side of Western science then? How do you, I mean, where is this project, in this dichotomy?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question also about my self-perception. Yeah, I think one of the most bright examples is what I already mentioned about how to cook marmots.
Yeah.
So Western decision is not to hunt marmots at all, just don't touch them and everything will be okay with bubonic plague. So this is how Western science work. It's not only about the knowledge itself, it's also about the process of getting It's what I mean by the Western science is not only about the knowledge itself, it's also about the process of getting the knowledge, and it is important that this kind of science is supported by the state or by corporations who are interested in this region, and they have a goal just to stop spreading bubonic plague in the region, and other goals are not that important like this. And traditional environmental knowledge answers different question how to cook marmots so that not get bubonic plague. Yeah, and there are also decisions, there are also ways to do it, to hunt and to cook and at the same time to maintain this. And the question about my self-identification, I think, of course, I try to be somewhere in the middle. I cannot stop being a Western scholar. I will stay a Western scholar, but at the same time, I came from the field of humanities, and this field is absolutely underdeveloped in the Greater Altai in terms of climate change. So people who work on climate change are concentrating on climatology, ecology, and not so much on local perspectives on climate change. So I think that's what puts me in the middle between. Yeah, so maybe humanities. I'm speaking about environmental humanities in general, and hopefully they can work as a transmitter between different communities. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If not, we are actually also at the time that we normally end. But I admit that we have had some technical issues, so I would be willing to give another 5 minutes or so to make up for it. But if there are no further questions, I suggest that there's one. Okay, that's the that's the last one then. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. And yeah, I'm sorry to run over time. I just can't resist but sort of provoke you a little bit. I love the question that was posed by Tatiana about introducing another dimension to the research. And I think, so I'm a social cultural anthropologist. I used to study infrastructure and architecture in the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Russia. I don't anymore. And there's a very good reason for that. Right? So, however, just to sort of target your talk, I loved the complexity that you introduced between the kind of indigenous knowledge, state power, post-Soviet transition, and the way that a kind of neoliberal, extreme neoliberal economy takes over this kind of planned economy. And in many ways, I think we can really see the dimensions of colonization, because the indigenous populations were inherently colonized in the Soviet experience. We can see the effects of environmental degradation owing to Soviet planned economies. And this is obvious in like the RLC example, for example, right? But now there is this kind of new dimension that you've introduced, which is this kind of verticality, which is also our kind of metaphor for power, speaking of like the kind of poetics of power, etc. And so if we are to think about the current sort of intersection between humanitarian, political, and ecological crises, how do you continue to do ethnographic research in Russia, where basically there is a cultural and political boycott because of the war in Ukraine? So in my case, I was conducting ethnographic fieldwork in Moscow, and I stopped. I completely pulled out, and I don't know. And I was, working with a Western institution. I was at the Freie Universität, etc. Could not, completely dead in the water. Research stopped entirely. How did you manage to sort of work through that complex dimension of your three-dimensional research project?
Thank you for the question. First of all, so far I'm not going to conduct any research in Russia. It's just impossible now to go there on the field trip for me, and not only for like institutional reasons, but also for personal reasons. So yeah, I have to avoid this region in my research, and I will concentrate mostly on Kazakhstan and Mongolia for now. The project is for 5 years, so there is still hope that something will change in the future. I think we all hope, but even if it will not happen, I can use the data which I have now, and I have some connections in the region of the Altai, so it's possible to take interviews remotely. So, for example, I have connections to the administration of national parks and some representatives of the local population. Of course, it is not the same, absolutely not the same as real field research, but it would allow us to at least somehow compensate the impossibility of work in Russia. Yeah, did I answer your question, or it was okay? Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Then I suggest we conclude here, and thank you once again very much, Andrei, for joining us and presenting this really fascinating project outline, and we look forward to seeing results and progress as you go along. Wish you the best of luck, of course, you and the whole team. And for those of you who have braved the BVG strike and are here in person, everybody, you are, of course, welcome to join us for dinner with Andrei. We will go to restaurant Belluno, which is near to the S-Bahn station in Nicolassi. So hope to continue the discussion there. And everybody who was stuck at home, thanks for joining us online, and wishing you a good evening. So thanks again.